Unsolicited advice.
What you whispering for? Yo, what's unsolicited advice? Take it or leave it. There's nothing worse than being single like your friends, right? Or being back to being single and all your friends are single. You know, when you're in a relationship and all your friends are single, sometimes the worst feeling is to break up and now you're single with your friends. And some of y'all might look at it and say, no, you know, now I can go have a good time. I can hang out with my friends. Those are my, support system. You really don't want to be single like your friends, And we're going to break this down too, because we all have those type of friends where they're always single. It's always something. And they kind of want you to be single with them too. So there's 5 different types of single females. You have the always single friend. You have the jealous competitor. You have the drama queen, or the dramatic person. And then you have the overprotective parent friend. And then you have like what you would call the group gatekeeper, where they're trying to keep the group together by any means necessary. So the first one, of course, I said, they're the always single friend. They see relationships as limiting, and they want you to keep living, the freedom lifestyle, like they want you to be free with them. They'll hype you. They'll hype you up with casual flings, but discourage anything serious. But they fear that you'll leave them. They'll feel that you'll leave them behind if you settle down. So they're always single because they feel like they always want to make themselves available to you. And this is your friend. Then you have what you call the jealous competitive friend. So they treat dating like a scoreboard. So they always want to be the most desirable in the group, right? If you're getting attention, they'll try to redirect it back to themselves, They may flirt with your partner or warn them about you to stay ahead. I'm telling you, everybody has a friend like that where they're that jealous where they'll try to flirt with your partner or they'll try to warn your partner about you. Just so they can stay ahead. Just so you don't have nobody and they're on top. Hey, I tell you, it's a dirty game. You gotta watch it. You don't want to be single like your friends. There's a reason. There's always a reason. What was the other one I said? The dramatic one. You always have a dramatic one in the crew. It's always drama. Always in a crisis, always in breakups, always in arguments, always having some type of financial problem. They demand your emotional and physical availability. They're the ones they'll get mad. Like if you just can't be there for them, or maybe you're just tired of all of it. You just need a break, So they don't want you to have any type of love life, It's almost like they just can smell it. They can sniff it on you and be like, oh, you're having too much fun in your relationship. Let me bring some drama into it so you have more time for me. Then you have the overprotective friend. I always got that one overprotective friend, right? They think no one else will be good enough for you. They're hypercritical of any flaw that your partner has. Sometimes they'll try to invent little issues, just to protect you. They'll invent, they'll just try to bring up some little shit to try to make it seem like you're not good enough or that person's not good enough for you. So they all the cautions that they give you, it'll often block you from giving relationships a fair chance because they're your best friend. So you value their opinion. So they're going to have you paranoid. You're going to be looking at stuff you don't even really need to be looking at. But in their mind, that's the point. They got you. And the last one is the group gatekeeper. There's 5 of them. So the 5th one is the group gatekeeper. So this one, they control who's allowed in your social circle, or they think that they control it. If they don't vibe with your partner or the people that you bring around, they'll make them feel unwelcome every time until you choose between them. between them or your partner. So, so they think that they have a sense of authority over your personal life because they think that they're the leader of the crew or they're the leader of your group. But the thing about why your friends are always single is because they don't approve of anyone. They just want, they think the friendship is the relationship. That's the most fun and sacred thing to them. So they set impossible standards, for who you should date. They discourage you by pointing out every flaw in that person. They might fear you'll change or drift away if you're in a relationship. They project, they project their own issues. If they've been hurt, they assume your relationship's going to end up the same way. They give you protective advice, but, that's actually like rooted in their own fear, their own little jealousy or bitterness. They may warn you about red flags that are really just personal preferences, and you got to know how to decipher between the two. Sometimes it is just personal preference. Don't nothing be wrong. That's just they preference. They want to keep the group dynamic the same. They want everybody to be single or everybody to be in a relationship. If y'all are a group of friends, you always got some that want y'all to all be single at the same time or all of y'all are in a relationship at the same time. They feel like that's the only way it'll work. So if you're single, you're more available for last minute plans, late night talks or weekend adventures. They like that. But if you're in a relationship, that means less time for them, So they kind of undermine your dating life, or they sabotage things, or they all of a sudden treat you like you're not a part of the group anymore. And then that always tends to influence your dating choices because you don't even realize that you're being played, in that moment. They encourage you to only date people who fit their friend group vibe, they can benefit from. They steer you towards or away from certain looks, jobs, or even lifestyles. So the way a man looks or the way a woman looks or, whatever job they have or lifestyle they have, they'll either try to steer you towards it or steer you away from it. And you think that they're helping you, but they're helping themselves. Sometimes they'll sabotage, and I spoke about that, but, talking negative about the person, especially behind the scenes, and some of them, they're bold enough to say it to their face. And it's like, why would you do that? But some of them, they do that. You have some that'll drain your energy. They'll just drain all that negativity. Here it comes. And they'll drain your energy. If they'll constantly create drama, needing you to be be an emotional ladder to either bring them up or bring them down, or keep you out late partying, you have you have less mental space for dating because the whole point, you might meet somebody special and it's like, yeah, but if I don't go do this with my friends, then they're gonna feel like we're not friends anymore, and I don't want that. So I'm telling you, it's a dirty little game some of them play, and they know what they're doing. Some of them, I was just thinking, but some of them, they're not going to directly tell you to stay single, but their lifestyle choices make relationships harder to maintain. So you got to think about that too. And we talked about the playful undermining. They try to playfully undermine every little thing. They make little jokes about your partner, either in front of you or they talk about them behind your back. They'll say something like, wow, he wearing that shirt again. It sounds harmless, but it plants seeds of embarrassment and doubt, in your mind. They're trying to helpfully overshare stuff. They casually bring up your past flings or bad habits or embarrassing moments, especially when your partner around. They love to say stuff. Remember that one guy you ghosted for 2 months? So now, this dude looking at you crazy. You know, they looking at you crazy, but you know, in your mind, it's like, whoa, you know, whoa, what happened? What I do? You know, so things like that can get a little carried away. You know, and then there's the friend test. Some of them be wanting to, you know, invite you over. You know, they want you to invite your partner over for like a little friend test. They want to act cold or unwelcoming towards your partner. You know, just to see how you react. You know, or just to see how they react. You know, just want to see how serious it is, or that's their way to see how serious it is. You know, they may think it's cute, but it's hurting y'all's relationship. You know, they're gonna stop coming around. You know, all of a sudden they constantly inviting you to stuff. You usually don't even hear a word from your friends. Now all of a sudden they inviting you to every little thing. They plan things to exclude your partner or overlap your dates, you know, where you got to choose between going on your date or doing the thing your friend wants you to do or bringing your partner to your friend's event. So, if, you know, sometimes you got to choose between your date or your relationship. They try to frame their advice as being protective. You know, I just don't want you to settle. They'll say stuff like that. And it's like, so you don't want me to settle, right? You don't want me to settle. But is it that you don't want me to settle, or you just don't want me to be with anybody? You know, they just, you know, if you're already having doubts, you know, maybe it's a sign. You know, they'll just say little stuff, little slick stuff. It sounds supportive, but it's creating doubt in your mind. Because if they're being supportive, they're going to tell you, hey, you know, this is going to work. I think this is going to work out, you know. I think this time, you know, you really found somebody special. Now, they may not necessarily agree with what they're saying, but it's all about being supportive to you because this is something that you chose, not them. So, they, you know, usually you'll say, you know, hey, you know, everything will be okay, you know. Everything, you know, I think y'all, you know, y'all make a good couple, you know, if y'all just, you know, spend time with each other, get to know each other, things are going to work out. You know, you just want to say positive things, but if they saying little slick stuff like that, they ain't being supportive, you know. And then, you know, they love to hit you with the I'm just being honest comment, you know. They say blunt and negative things, you know, they talk about your partner's looks or jobs or personality, and then they hide behind, you know, the fact that they always honest. Oh, I'm just keeping it real. You know me, I'm gonna be real. You know, I'm just telling you the truth because I care. Come on now. Come on. It's not even that they care. It's not even that they care. It's just, you know, they don't want you to be with nobody. You know, sometimes it look a little suspect, you know. And then all this is just a distraction, you know. They keep you overly busy, you know, with drama, and you know, they drain up all your emotional energy, so you don't have time for a relationship. You don't have time to build one. You know, it just all feels like sabotage. So at the end of the day, you're gonna be single like your friends. You need to pick and choose whether you want to be single or you want to be in a relationship. Because if you do have a circle of friends and they care about you, and they are your real friends, they're going to want you to have a good relationship. They're going to be supportive of it. They're going to champion it. They're going to be your biggest cheerleaders. They're going to be supportive. So, you know, I say all this to say this, you know, you do what's best for you. Sometimes you shouldn't give a fuck what your friends say. Sometimes. You know, now, if your friends are your real friends, they'll know when to speak up. Like if you're in an abusive relationship, then yeah, you probably should listen to some of the things that they're letting you know and things like that. So you should already know what's going on in your own household before your friends have to tell you things or, you know, hip you to game. You know, if they're constantly having to hip you to game, it says more about your intelligence than it does theirs. So be careful of that too. But I'm out, y'all. You can take it or leave it. Bye-bye.